Leave and follow is a theme that's woven throughout Scripture. You read the Bible from front to back, you get this coming up over and over and over again. God calls his people, to leave things behind and follow him. Typically, it's leaving behind personal plans, things you know, and to follow God into the great unknown. Oftentimes, it's a very scary prospect. We see this in Genesis 12, which Sarah read just a little while ago, with Abram. God called Abram to leave his family behind, which I'll explain in a bit, was a huge, huge thing. Leave your family, leave your security, leave your home, and follow me. Of course, God's call to Abram was just a foreshadowing of what Jesus would eventually do for his disciples. He would call them. He would say, leave behind your nets, James, John, leave behind your nets, follow me. Matthew, leave behind your tax collecting booth. Leave behind the life you knew and follow me into the unknown. And Jesus does the same for us, for you and for me today. He says, leave and follow. Well, what does that look like and what does that mean? And I got to be honest with you, I am perfectly comfortable and happy right where I am. So it takes a lot of convincing sometimes to get me to move. Maybe you're like that. And I think maybe a great place to start is before I can consider what I have to leave, it's a good idea to have some sort of understanding of where I am going. So what it really boils down to is the issue of purpose. What is my purpose in life? What am I here to do? Now, figuring out my purpose is much like navigating life. You're navigating the story that is my life. And I know that many of you could share many different stories of how you got to be sitting in this pew today. Some of you maybe have a straighter line that led to here. Some of you, I'm sure it wasn't perfectly straight, maybe a little straighter line. And some of you, maybe you're all over the map, and somehow you just find yourself here today. And maybe some of you don't even know why you're here today. Point is we all have this tendency to try and make sense of the world in our own ways at times, and it feels like we're navigating this journey of life, and we're just trying to make the best decisions that we can. And how do we do that? Well, as I was growing up, I never thought that life would suddenly get easy. I didn't think that suddenly, I'd emerge, as I'm growing up, as a elementary age kid, high school, college. I never looked to my future and said, someday I'll emerge and there won't be any problems in the world. I never thought that. But I did have sometimes this naive feeling that maybe when I got older, things would get easier. Is that true? Now, you see, as I grew up, and maybe you can relate to this, I found my own life intersecting with, my story, I should say, intersecting with the stories of others. I'd hear other people's stories, family, friends, authority figures, and I'd hear about the way they looked at the world, the way they made decisions, what happened in their lives, and sometimes I'd absorb it. I'd have this decision to make. How am I going to incorporate this into my life? It's not only the people I came in contact with, but the culture also constantly was and is giving me a story through television, the news, these TV shows, which seem like they just keep getting more elaborate and complex, which can be fun and a good thing, but they have a story to tell, a worldview to promote sometimes. Through movies, which are getting more exciting and elaborate, and even through video games. Parents, you with younger kids and teenagers, these video games are getting more and more complicated. They're telling a story. And the point of all this is that every single story has something to say about the world. And as I'm living my life, as I'm trying to make sense of everything, oftentimes I find myself absorbing different things, trying to figure out, what am I going to accept? What am I going to run with? What am I going to maybe keep to the side a little bit more? Let me give you an example. I'll give you a very simple one I think everybody should be able to relate to. If you can't relate to this one, shame on you. Green Eggs and Ham. It's a children's book. Good. I'm guessing all of you have probably read it, and parents, when you've had your child ask you to read it for about the 50th time, you probably know every page. But what's the point of that children's story? Sam I Am says, here's green eggs and ham. Try it. He's telling the other character, trying to convince them to try it. try it on a car, eat with a fox. You could eat it in a train in the dark, on a plane in the water, and over and over and over. The other guy's like, no, I will not try it. I will not try it. I will not try it. And then what happens at the very end? Say, I do like green eggs and ham. Yeah, the message of that story is a simple one. If you have little children, you know that, and I'm in that stage right now. There's a child sitting at the table. I won't eat it. I won't eat it. I won't try. And they don't even know what it tastes like. Try it. You may like it. Okay, that's a good message. Would we all agree? Yes, good message. How far do we take the try it message? And how do you know? It's great and all when we're talking about eating at a table. Oh, and so what about when your story interacts with something else, somebody else's story, and they're saying, try it. As you're moving forward, give this a try. Bring your purpose and meaning into a better picture. How do you decide? Well, I would argue that oftentimes we use different methods to make decisions in life. The first one I would say is feelings. We have a tendency to be feelings-driven people. Now understand this, feelings are not bad in and of themselves. God gave us feelings, and they can be a good thing. And the Bible teaches that deep down inside we have a conscience. And so sometimes our feelings speak from that conscience. We know when some things are right and some things are wrong. So sometimes those feelings can actually inform us. So don't get me wrong here. But there are limitations as well. I would argue that our culture as a whole oftentimes promotes feelings-driven decisions. How do you feel? That's how you should make that decision. I wanted to read a synopsis from the next Pixar movie coming out that everyone's going to go see. I know, I'll go see too, I'm sure my kids. But it's interesting. It's a Pixar movie called Inside Out. It's going to be coming out soon. And this is the synopsis, so just listen to me, okay? It says, growing up can be a bumpy road, and it's no exception for Riley, who is uprooted from her Midwest life when her father starts a new job in San Francisco. Like all of us, Riley is guided by her emotions. Joy, fear, anger, disgust, and sadness. The emotions live in, get this, headquarters, the control center inside Riley's mind where they help advise her through everyday life. And if you have little kids, this is very much true. Kids are driven by emotions. And one of the biggest challenges as a parent sometimes is to help them to not be so driven by their feelings and emotions. But it's hard sometimes when we live in a culture that says you should be primarily pushed by your feelings and emotions. And I think we can all probably agree with that. So how can feelings sometimes be a problem? Let me give you an example. So consider a man who hasn't been to church in a while because he was hurt. He was deeply hurt. And so someone comes up to him and says, try it, give church a try. On a bus, I'm just kidding. No, give it a try, okay? Just give it a try, give it a chance. And this man who's deeply, deeply hurt, if he's driven purely by emotions, what is he going to say? No, I was hurt, and I can't let that go. I don't feel like going to church. What about a man whose feelings are driving him towards trying out a new relationship with another woman? Oh, by the way, this man happens to be married and he has children, but you know what? He doesn't feel the same way about his wife as he used to, but he really feels strongly about this other woman. Should his feelings drive that decision? The young woman, young lady, I'll say, high school age, teenager, just wants to feel peace, wants to be at peace, feels like this world is just collapsing around her, and someone comes up to her and says, what's wrong? I just want to feel better. And her friend says, well, I got something that'll make you feel better. Try this drug. It's great. It'll make you feel so much better. Should she let her feelings drive that decision? Brothers and sisters, there are shortcomings to first and foremost making our decisions based on feelings. But I know some of you out there are probably thinking, well, I'm not a feelings-driven person. I use good old-fashioned reason. That's what I use. I'm not an emotional guy. I think things through, right? And this is a good thing. It says in the small catechism in our church doctrine that God gave me my reason and all my senses, and he gave me this gift to be able to think things through. good thing. It's a good thing. I should be able to process things, think through things, okay? This was a quality my father had, which drove me absolutely up the wall, actually. He was a thinker, and 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 a thinker. Just make a decision, you know? He drove me crazy sometimes when I was a teenager. I remember very clearly up to this point in my life going to a department store called American when I was younger. I was a teenager. And he was going to pick out a CD player, okay? And this was going to be for his office. And my dad wanted to pick apart every decision and make sure he had thought it through. Like, he was not somebody who would make a rash decision, and oftentimes this served him very well. But there were also some times that drove me, as a high school kid who was very impatient, nuts. And we went to the store, and we were there, I could have sworn, for about an hour, where he was looking at one CD player. I remember it was in Iowa. I don't even think it even exists anymore. And the other one was a Kenwood, these two CD players, you know, and he's like, well, this one over here is a 3-disc changer. This one over here is a 5-disc changer. This one over here is cheaper. This one here is more expensive, but it's supposed to have better sound. This one over here, I mean, really? Just pick a CD player, for crying out loud, you know? And so here's the thing with reason. It's a beautiful thing. It is great to be, and God love you, and I tend to be, and I inherit, see, and it probably drove me nuts because I tend to be a thinker too. That's why it drove me nuts about my father. Sometimes it works that way, but when we make decisions solely upon our reason and brain power, we oftentimes find ourselves arguing in circles at some point. Let's go back to our good friend, the man who was hurt when he went to church, you know, long ago, and he hasn't been back for a while. And someone walks up to him and says, try it, give it a chance, come back. Having a relationship with God is an important thing. You should make this a part of your life. Well, reason would tell me on the one hand that I was hurt. And there is a large, and I know that people are not, I know that people aren't perfect, sure, but I've been hurt in the past, and it's very likely that could happen again. I can also reason that perhaps if I could get over my emotions, and sure, I could go, and I might benefit from going to church, even though I don't quite understand what this all involves yet. So yeah, maybe I could use some growth in that area. But I can also reason that there are other things in my life that I need to be working on right now because, you know, I've always wanted to read more books, and I really like that downtime on Sundays, and, you know, so you see what's happened here? Which one am I going to listen to? What's the driving force behind it? If it's just reason, well, I've just reasoned myself into a corner. Cyclical. And around it goes. Just pick a CD player already. So reason has its limitations as well. So if feelings don't work purely, if reason doesn't work purely, then maybe we could go to experience. Now that might be an idea. I could go to experience. So, you know, and experience is a wonderful thing. When I'm going to make a decision, I look at what has happened in my life. Okay? I look at what has happened in my life, and I learn from it. Okay? So, you know, as a pastor, I can say that served me well at times. I listen to somebody who shares a story, and I might be able to relate to you because I've had a similar experience. It helps me to share the gospel with people because there can be a common touching point, and I can share how in my own life I've wrestled with a similar thing. It can be a very, very good thing, and God gives us experiences. In fact, He wants us to experience a relationship with Him. So it's a good thing, but you see what happens if we're think about what happens if we're completely experience-driven people. You know, I'm going to learn from my mistake, and I'm not going to make the mistake again. Let's go back to our friend who has not been to church in a long time, who was hurt by the church, and someone walks up to him and says, try it, give church a try again, come on. What does experience tell him? I've burned that bridge before. Not going to make that mistake again. I'm not wasting my time. But you see how we do the same thing? You can do the same thing. You could say, experience could tell me that if I've been divorced, that I should never get married again because, well, that didn't work. So perhaps I should just, you know, live with somebody else and handle things differently because it didn't work the first time. Parent who experienced a horrible childhood can be completely driven by giving their children happiness in this life. That becomes the most important thing for them because they had that experience. But do you see how that can have shortcomings and lead to hurt and heartache in other areas as well? You see, there's problems with trying to do everything through feelings, through reason, and through experience. There's always going to be a pitfall somewhere. We can use each of these on their own, or we can try and use a combination of one of these, but at the end of the day, we're always going to end up at some point with a life that looks a little bit like this. Jumbled pieces all over the place. And think of your life as a puzzle you're trying to put together. And it looks like this. Where do I start? Where do I start? Try to put this picture together. What's the purpose? Where do I start? How do I work through all of this? Well, think about this. Maybe you can relate to this one. Growing up, I'd get together with my family a lot of times, and I really enjoyed my family get-togethers. And every now and then, we didn't do this a ton. I know some other families do this. We would get one of those 2,000-piece puzzles, okay? We'd stick them on a table whenever there was free time. What do we do? People would go over there, and we'd mindlessly try to put together a puzzle. We might talk, and here's this huge puzzle with all these pieces there, okay? When you're putting together a puzzle, there's a couple things that you have to have in mind, especially a huge one like that. Number one, what does the picture look like? If you don't know what the picture looks like, good luck, all right? Number two, where do we start? Are you a border person? We've got to start with the borders first. Are you a person that likes to put together the pictures first? That's me. I like to put together pictures and then try and fit it together that way. So you got that issue. Where do I start? And then lastly, what happens if I get this, when I get 1,999 pieces together and I find out there's one missing? It's just maddening. That's why I don't start usually. I just don't want to get to that point. I'm scared. My kids knocked one on the floor. Where is it? Are we missing any? Look at the table. I don't know if we're missing any. It's impossible to know. But you see, this is exactly how we go through life. And when I talked about making sense of the world, what we do is we try and figure out what the picture, we try to make up our own purpose for the world. This is what the picture should look like. And I have my own idea about where I should start. Borders, picture. Okay, so I would say, so I think that family comes first. That's where I start. That's the most important piece to this puzzle, is putting my family first before anything else. My children come first. My work comes first. That's the first most important piece, because if I put that in there, everything else will work out great, because that's how I'm going to serve my family. The most important piece is your feelings. Okay, get all their feelings in check. Some books would say get those feelings in check. Other things will work from there. Reason. Reason is the most important. This is why you need to read books, you need to study. Everything will fit together. Have as many experiences as you can and learn from it. And you see, that's how you put together a puzzle anyway, right? You figure out pieces, you turn them around. That doesn't work. I'll put that over here, put another one in. It's just trial and error, trial and error, trial and error. You get the point? Well, here's the thing. Brothers and sisters in Christ, God has given us a purpose. He tells us what the picture is supposed to look like. And all you got to do is open up to Genesis chapter 1 to find out the purpose of humanity. God created us, and it was good. And what was good about it all? God was at the center. He was at the center, and everything flowed from him. He created order into the world, put everything in the way it was supposed to be, and God was right there and at the center. And what flowed from there? Our love for others. Our care for creation, which includes other people, most importantly. Being in a relationship with other people, loving other people instead of ourselves first. You notice that it wasn't me at the middle, it was God at the middle. And then what was the next most important thing? My neighbor, those around me. Well, then, of course, we know you keep reading, you get to Genesis chapter 3, and you find out that, well, we live in the aftermath of the fall, and there's some problems that go along with that. Because I live in the aftermath of the fall, I have a disease called sin, which causes me to think of myself first and to look at that puzzle called my life and say, I'm going to stick myself in the middle, and I'm going to say, that is the most important thing. And I'm going to argue with everybody else who tells me otherwise. I have my own opinion on what goes first. That was the problem. What do? We just kicked God out of the equation, said that I am what starts this whole thing, and I have my best strategy, and this is going to work. And I'm going to make the picture that I want to make. The problem is you can't make your own picture. It's already been set. But we know the truth. Deep down inside, we know the truth that the piece that we feel is so important, as we look at our lives and we feel like it's a mess all over the place, we know that our own doings, our own tryings, our own attempts at fixing everything will fail. We know it. We just hate to admit it. Hate to admit it. I'd like to take a second to talk to you about Abraham. Abram, a man that God came to and said something very challenging. He said, I want you to leave behind all the things that you find give you comfort, all your plans, all the things that you know, and I want you to follow me into the great unknown. Abram was a wealthy man. He had everything that people would have wanted in those days. Okay? He had family. He had a name. He had protection. If you fought other people in those days, who did you bring to the fight? Your family. He had a whole tribe of people, a whole clan of people to support him and to keep him protected. And God said, leave that sanctuary, leave that safety net, leave that plan behind, and follow me. This is all what happens in the aftermath of the fall. Sin came into the world. We see how there's all this mess going on, and God said, you know what, I'm going to redeem this world, I'm going to restore this world, and I'm going to start this plan by working through this man named Abram, and I'm going to call him to do something crazy. Leave behind the things that he's thought that he finds his self-worth and identity in, and follow me. That's what I'm going to ask him to do. And God said this to Abraham. He said, follow me. And did he say, and by the way, this is the action plan that you're going to follow through. You'll be doing this. You're going to go to this place and the next. No, he didn't do that. There was no plan, only a promise. God looked at Abraham and he said, I am going to give you a land that will be an inheritance for all your children. They will inherit this. And I will make your name, you think your name's great. Now I'm going to make your name even greater. And I will create a nation through you, and all the peoples of the world will be blessed through you. That was a promise. What do you think Abram's feelings told him? Sweet. That sounds like fun, adventure. Yeah, right. It was not a small undertaking to move your entire family, to leave all your extended family and become vulnerable. I'm sure there was some anxiety in there. What did reason tell him? Yeah, reason always tells me to abandon all my plans and just kind of take a leap of faith. That's what my reason always tells me, right? You think experience told him to go? Yeah. People, I'd step foot out here, there's going to be all sorts of conflict, there's going to be all sorts of issues. Why would I want to do that? No, Abram wasn't better than you or me. He had that disease, he had sin just like us. What he did though, what Abram did was he just looked to the promises of God and trusted. Despite his sinful nature, he trusted that God would do what he promised he would do. And guess what? God always does what he promises. I didn't mention this part either. To be a great nation, Abram would have to have kids. Do you know that his wife couldn't have kids? It's mentioned earlier. So to make matters even more emotionally draining and stressful, your wife can't have kids, and to be able to bless everybody, you got to have kids. How's this going to work? What happens? God keeps his promise. Abram and Sarah go to the land that God called them to go to. Abram and Sarah have a son named Isaac, who gave birth to Jacob, who had 12 sons, later become known as the tribe of Israel. Don't worry about all this. If this is something that's confusing for you, this is the main point. Through Abram, you follow his line, it leads all the way to Jesus. How did God, through Abram, bless the entire world? He gave the entire world Christ. He gave all the people of the world what they so desperately needed. Abram didn't see it during his life, but that ultimate fulfillment came through Jesus, through baptism, as we're all brought into a family together, whether or not we are biologically connected to Abraham. So let's go back to that puzzle. Where do I start? It's a mess. Where do I start in my life? How do I know where I'm going and leave? It all starts with Jesus on the cross, dying for you, the ultimate illustration of God's love. It starts with God's grace, because you can look at your life right now and think about how much of an absolute mess it is. And right now, today, God looks at you and says, I love you. Today is a brand new day, fresh start. How do you know? Because Jesus died for you and his hand is reaching out to you. He loves you. You have peace. You have comfort. You have everything that you desire deep down inside. So that the grace of Jesus comes to you and allows you to just be still and stand. But then then God comes to us with a crazy promise. You see, Jesus didn't just die on a cross, he rose again, which means that there are greater things to come. What you're going through right now will not be forever. And he says with God at the center, with Jesus' grace pouring into my heart right now, giving me identity, giving me self-worth. With God at the center, with grace of God at the center, I'm called to go and love others. But that's kind of uncomfortable. It's not always an easy thing to do. Well, how can I do that? Well, God gives me a promise. He says, go, and I promise you, it may not be easy. It may be hard at times. It may be hard even to carve out time for God right now in your life. But hey, guess what? I promise you that things will get better. It's worth it. Go and leave some of these other things behind. What does this look like? Let me offer you a personal illustration, because this is something that I'm not telling you to do that I've never struggled with. Many of you know about Genesis Community. Some of you are probably a little less familiar. It's something we started here at Shepherd of the Lakes to reach out to people outside our walls, to share God's love, okay? We started the planning process for this community about 2 years ago. Pastor Miles came to me and said, we're going to try something. We're going to try and love and serve the people in our community. And I want you to help put this thing together. And so for a greater part of a year, that's what I did. And about a month before we launched Genesis Community, which was supposed to be this safe haven for people to come in and to hear God's love and for us to love them unconditionally, I was about to have a mental breakdown. In August, I can tell you that I had gotten so wrapped up in my own desire for this thing to be a success. All my feelings, all my emotions were put into this thing. My reason and all my mental capacity had gone into trying to make sure that all the pieces were where they're supposed to be. And my experience as I talked to other churches trying to do this was that many other churches had run into brick walls. Felt like Abram. Go. Yeah. And as my wife would say, I was a bit of a hot mess at the beginning of August. Thing is I forgot the first puzzle piece. I'm a pastor. I forgot about it. Left it behind. I came across a book written by another pastor, and it really kind of ministered to me. It was a book called One Way Love by Tolian Shavidian. And some of you are familiar with this book. And it wasn't the book that changed me. It was God's word that changed me. Because he shared his own struggles with performance and success and being focused on all these things in life, doing. And he pointed me back to the Bible, and I found myself opening up the book of Colossians and poring over. And at the center of that letter of Colossians, it says this: focus on the things that are above, not on things of this earth, for you have died and your life is hidden with God in Christ. I was focusing entirely on this world and what I could do, and how I could make this thing be the perfect picture of what I wanted it to be. And it was destroying me. And what God did was he got a hold of me and he said, stop it. It's not about you. It's about what I do through my grace, through the gospel. Get things back in focus. He slapped me around. Today I can tell you that it's just amazing what God has done through that community. Not me. It has nothing to do with Pastor Ben. Brothers and sisters, when you step out of your comfort zone, you start to seek to love other people. With God at the center, understand who you are, and you start to love other people. It's amazing what happens. Small groups who come and served at Genesis, God bless you for leaving behind your plans for that day and seeking to serve other people. I've talked to people and seen people who it is a safe haven for them. They've never heard the gospel in this way before, and it has changed their lives. It has changed my life. My wife was just telling me how it's changed the way she looks at things too. It's amazing what happens when you just stand in God's grace and you go and you leave behind our plans, the things that give us identity and worth, and we just go. What do you need to leave behind? I run into people all the time who say, I don't have time for church. I'm too busy. I got plans. What are you building your life on? What puzzle piece are you sticking in the middle? Promises of God or something else? How are you building that puzzle with your children? What's the center of that puzzle? Is it something else, or do you understand that grace is, the promises of God is something that will change your children's lives? And it's worth the fight. Understand that God stands at the center. That's God's picture. We also understand we're called to love other people. What are you called to leave behind? To love the people in your family. Have you looked outside of yourself recently to look at the people right within your own home and said, what can I do for you? How are you? How can I serve you today? Have you looked at the people in your church community? Have you looked in the surrounding community of Livingston County? We are a very wealthy, well-to-do community, and sometimes it's easy for us to get stuck in ourselves. And we sometimes don't realize that there are many people in this community who are very not well off, who are in very, very meager living conditions, and a simple plate of food can mean the world to them. There are kids in this community who need a home, who have been abused and hurt as children. And all they need is a home. One person to say, I love you unconditionally because I know you need a place. But no, I don't want to break up my plan. I got a plan for my life, and I don't want to get uncomfortable. Do you see how messed up the puzzles we put together are at times? Brothers and sisters, I want you to understand this. Know this. I am not perfect. I screw up all the time. But I want to invite you to join with me and seek, by God's grace, to build our lives together on a promise. May we do so for the sake of Jesus. Amen.